The topic of women and futures is one of the topics that I have worked on quite a lot during my life, especially as I traveled quite a lot around the world, especially in developing countries, and especially for the United Nations University, which under the sponsorship, in a way, and encouragement of Elise Boulding, the great sociologist that worked very much on women's issues in her life. They wanted me to initiate research around the world with women in mainly developing countries. Much has been written indeed on women and futures through the years and in different countries and by different groups of women. I shall try and recall thinking of some of the most remarkable women that have dealt with this important issue. I shall also describe some parts of my own involvement in the issue of women and futures. I am using the term futures in the plural as it's now fully recognized that we don't speak of one future, but of many possible, probable, and desirable futures, which are the consequence of different events or choices occurring in the present, events occurring and choices made in the past also and in the present. Many are the women who became more and more interested in futures, as the awareness of the growth of change in every sector of human life becomes more and more evident and part of every person's life. The awareness by women of such increased changes has been evident now for many decades and has prompted women to think of futures, women researchers and women scholars, etc. I will start by recalling some writings of the book Women Household, and indeed much has been written about women and futures through the years and in different countries as well as by different groups of women. I shall here try and recall the thinking of some of the most remarkable women that have dealt with this important issue. I shall also describe some women that have dealt especially, specifically, with this issue. I'm using the term futures as is well known now and fully recognized that there is not one future, but many possible, probable, or as desirable futures, which are the consequences of different events occurring or choices made in the past or in the present. Many are the women who became more and more interested and become continuously in futures, as the awareness of the growth of changes in every sector of human life becomes more and more evident and part of every person's life. The awareness by women of such increasing changes has been evident for many decades now. I will start by recalling some of the writings in the book Women, Households and Change, which I wrote with Susan Strategies, which is actually reporting on research which has been carried out in different countries. I start by recalling, Elise Boulding is one of the greatest women. She's now not with us. She has recently disappeared, who spent her life in supporting, at the same time writing about women's issues. And her prologue in this book is very interesting in the dedication to all women and men whose work has gone into the collection and processing of the data on which these reports are based. I say thank you. To all who read these reports, I ask, what are the next steps? Which I think is a very challenging remembrance for us. What else? What should we do now? This comes from her prologue on the book. In this way, Elise Boulding encourages the readers to carry on such research in whatever way they think is most useful for women and households. With this phrase of her prologue on the book Women, Households and Change, is practically a collection of articles by women coming from different parts of the world. Elise shows her basic view of life. On one side, there is the need for both women and men to do all that is possible to understand the past, the history of all human beings, as well as the present, on the basis of understanding at the same time, of this understanding at the same time. It is important for all human beings to be builders of the future, in the plural, of the futures. We can build not one futures, but many futures, depending on what are the choices and what are the events that happen in the present. I share, of course, this thinking of Elise on women and men who need to understand as much as possible the history as well as the present in which they live, so as to be able to make choices that will build the futures that are the best possible for the coming generations. So whoever works in futures has to think of the coming generations. This is my point and Elise. Here, hence, the understanding of the present terms of possible happenings and choices that may lead to alternative futures, as well as being able to discern the best possible futures. And for these possible choose and act in the present. It is important for us, and it's basic thinking, on which the research on the future, and in the case of this article, futures of women, is a very important view in my understanding. I would like to better explain the meaning and the aim of the book Women, Household and Change. I wish to say it is the result of a project and field research carried out by the United Nations University in Tokyo and coordinated by myself in different developing countries in the world, which took me to travel in many countries, in developing countries in the world. All of the research was carried out in different developing countries, as well as directed by women living and working in such countries on issues related to women. It was not myself that directed the group, but it was the women in the country. The choice of the women who conducted research in the country, in the various countries, was a long process in itself, and it took many months. I had to travel around the three continents, Africa, Latin America, and Asia, to find such women, to find the ones that had experience and that could carry this important task for the United Nations University. And in search of women researchers who had some knowledge in human and social sciences, it took some time, and it took quite a lot of research. With the last phrase, in the last phrase of the book, of the prologue by Elise Boulding, she says, which was carried out, as I said, by many women in many developing countries, she says that men and women have to do all that is possible to understand the past, the history of all human beings, and on the basis of this understanding, it is important for all human beings, she repeats it, to be builders of the futures, in plural again. In fact, the book has its general aim, as already indicated, to search for special studies and build a perspective centered on the household. to better explain the meaning and aim of the book, I wish to say that it is the result of a project and research carried out by the United Nations University, which is in Tokyo, and coordinated by myself in the different developing countries, so to say, in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. In fact, all the research in the project, which was carried out in the different developing countries, and was carried out by women who had already experience in social research, with women of their own countries. So I had to search for women that had already such an experience. So that took a long time. As a result, the project started by myself as coordinator of the project, by traveling through Asia, Africa, and Latin America in search of women researchers that had already some experience in the fieldwork related to women, possibly in their countries or in other developing countries. As an instrument of the research, we decided, Elise Bildbording, at the time member of the board of directors of the United Nations University, and myself as coordinator of the project, to use a special approach, a so-called life course approach, which its creator, David Kurtz, describes it this way. As a distinctive series of roles and experiences through which individual passes as she or he ages from birth to death and inquires into the impact of various changes in these patterns. Moreover, it asks how people's reactions to change affect the larger societal forces, when in turn it influences the course of social change. In short, the perspective used, this special method is used to ask how people's reactions to change affect larger societal forces, which in turn influence the course of social change. In short, the perspective calls attention not only to the ways in which people's lives are influenced by broad economic, political, social, and cultural developments, but also to how the collective impact of individual reaction to these changes affects the course of subsequent changes at the macro level. This is the aim of this method which we use and which called the life course approach. The use of the life course approach has the advantage of supporting the researcher in his or her desire to find the reciprocal influence between different changes, economic, social, etc., and individual, as well as the individual reactions and their effects at the macro level. In this specific research on women, households, and change, this approach was specifically useful. Women and development. We must all remember that women are in development processes not only victims, as is often described, but as creators and alternative futures and builders of social structures, which unfortunately are often destroyed by violence in different forms, such as war, conflicts, natural disasters, etc. Women are the main household decision makers in almost all countries, but especially in developing countries. Different cases from empirical research have been presented in the book, Women, Households and Change, in countries belonging to these developing countries. In fact, women in development can be considered in different manners, as is the case. They are builders of solidarity networks in situations of severe emergency. They are capable of creating these networks. Such networks are usually created with no formal support and only on the strength of the women involved. Some cases were published in the mentioned book as a result of the fieldwork carried out for the UNO, such as Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, and Chile in Latin America, as well as Sri Lanka and China in Asia. Very difficult research in China, as well as Kenya in Africa. We had also carried out research in Côte d'Ivoire, but unfortunately the research in these countries, with the women of these countries, is not included in the published book because of the difficulties in getting approval from the country's authorities. It was the only case, but it was very sad because the women were very, very good at this work, but unfortunately we could not publish it. I have in fact to say that many difficulties were found in publishing the research that had been carried out. In indicating some of these difficulties, I have to recall that often decision makers and politicians at the local level tend to avoid recognizing women's contribution in overcoming emergency situations. It is hence interesting to recall the Household, Gender and Age project sought to understand the impact of macro events on women and households to bring women's participation in social change into the focus, which is very rarely brought, especially in developing countries. And it was difficult to indicate to decision makers how the participation could be enhanced by policies designed to support households and women in the present and in the future. The primary target group was national decision makers involved in development planning, labor issues, all levels of education, and health and nutrition. And this is somehow described in the book. In the book, Women, Households and Change. But not as much as I would have liked. My next point is women's studies and future studies. We have read Women in Development. I realized more and more during my field work that women are social actors, are able to build alternative futures to those created mainly by men. They are not often considered so, but in every culture, whatever the limitations, women are able to look ahead because of the need to build a better future that they foresee or would like at present for their children. Women's capacities are very adapted toward the continuous change. They are able to act rapidly. They are able to find different solutions at the same time for the same problems. They are able to act rapidly. They are able to do different things at the same time. They are able to choose among economic, social, political issues, the one that may influence future generations. As such, they are able to rebuild social structures destroyed by conflicts, natural disasters, or wars. Usually, these capacities are not visible. When women are able to create networks around the world, the changes they could bring may be surprising. This is also true if stronger networks between women working prospective studies could be more developed. The capacity to create networks by women, especially in situations of difficulty, and hence to be able to create networks of women by women, emerges clearly and has been described by different writers, such as once more Elise Baldwin in many of her writings. On this topic, I wish to recall the writings of some women related to the involvement in future studies, and which are collected in an interesting issue of Futures, published in May 2008. It's volume 4, May 2008, the Futures issue, by the title Feminist Futures, with as guest editors Ivana Milosevic, Karen Harley, and Anne Jensen. It is interesting that in the introduction the guest editors recalled 18 years had passed since another issue of Futures, the journal Futures, had been dedicated to women. It was a special issue of the journal called Gender and Age, with guest editor Magda Corden-McHale, wife and co-author of many writings on future studies with her husband John McKay, sociologist who published many well-known books, including The Future of the Future in 1969, which remains a basic book for future studies through the decades. It will remain, in my view. To conclude, another topic, feminist futures. This is the title of the futures issue that I just mentioned, in which, as I already indicated, has as guest editors Ivana Milosevic, Karen Howley, and Anne Jenkins, which I think will probably be present in the introduction. It is interesting to note that the authors ask themselves some questions that might help to respond to the issue in the long gap between the publications, 18 years, in a special issue of Future by Magda Corden-McHale in the year 1989, with a special issue, Gender and Age, and the one by the three editors just mentioned, published in 2008, with the title Feminist Futures. It is important to note that in situations of difficulty, women express their capacity of creating networks among women so as to face such situations. The capacity I have found very present in different countries, in which I have recalled the research previously. The countries where I have carried out the research. I wish to recall here in closing this presentation on women and future are Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Sri Lanka, China, and Kenya.